In this video, we dive into the disturbing case of the Turwilliger family. A story where affection twisted into obsession and control erupted into deadly violence in a normally peaceful corner of Brewer County. The evening of March 1, 2023 began quietly, but at about 1:30 a.m., emergency dispatch received a chilling call from a frightened man. He explained that two boys had reached out to him through a video chat, desperately pleading for help. Their illuminated faces appeared on his screen with a shadowy hallway stretching behind them inside the home. What unfolded within those walls? And why were these children the only ones able to speak about it? At the heart of that home was 63-year-old Glenda Turwilliger. Her world revolved around her family. She never sought recognition, but her constant presence allowed her daughter to work without worrying about the children. She handled morning routines, prepared meals, and shared bedtime conversations. Tasks that naturally became part of the family's everyday rhythm. Most of the responsibilities fell on her 35-year-old daughter, Constance Turwilliger, who juggled raising her children while keeping the household running. Her main focus was her eldest daughter. It had taken time for them to build trust. Constance didn't push or pressure. She simply listened. She created space for honesty. And because of that, Kiera Turwilliger grew emotionally, feeling understood in ways that helped shape her teenage years. Friends of 15-year-old Kiera described her as warm and approachable, yet noticeably mature for her age. She looked after her younger brothers and supported her mother with household tasks, responsibilities typically carried by adults. Yet Kiera longed for a stable, ordinary life, one where she could look ahead, make plans, and support the people she cared about. In that picture, 36-year-old Michael Watson played a major role. The two younger boys lived with him, and although he and Constance were no longer a couple, he remained deeply involved in his sons' lives. Michael was a constant presence. He handled everyday responsibilities like school drop-offs and pickups, stayed in contact with teachers, and made sure the boys stayed on track. He never tried to take control, but his steady involvement created a sense of structure and safety. The boys relied on for the Turwilliger family in Rockledge. Their hopes were modest and simple. Their dreams weren't grand. They simply wanted steady work, good schools for their children, and a safe, nurturing home. They lived with the quiet hope that tomorrow would look just like today. Calm, predictable, and undisturbed. The adults in their lives had created a world of stability for the Turwilliger boys, one filled with care and a sense of protection. At just 6 and 9 years old, the boys enjoyed a straightforward childhood. Their days revolved around school, play, and the small routines that made life feel secure. The older child was already learning to handle little responsibilities, while the younger one eagerly watched and followed his lead. Their home wasn't just a place to rest. It was filled with the warm sounds of loved ones, a space where laughter and Familiar voices made everything feel right. Their mother was the anchor of their world. Her guidance and steady presence gave the boys a solid foundation. They were comforted by her voice, her routines, and her ability to keep everything organized. With her nearby, life always felt manageable, as if she could solve any problem that came their way. Their grandmother, Glenda Turwilliger, played an equally meaningful role. Whenever their mom was tied up, the boys naturally turned to Glenda. Her presence made them feel calm and understood. She never argued or raised her voice. Instead, she gently corrected them and provided direction, firm, but never harsh. And Kiera was more than just their older sister. She set an example. Growing up isn't easy, but she helped them navigate school, friendships, and everyday challenges with the kind of advice only someone who cares deeply can give. Her support wasn't the kind a parent provides. It was the kind that comes from someone who truly knows you, listens without judgment, and understands you deeply. The boys trusted her completely. And their father, Michael Watson, remained present in his own steady way. When it counted, he showed up. He stayed involved, checked in, and made sure his sons knew he hadn't disappeared after the breakup. He wasn't a distant memory. He was an active part of their lives. His calm, reliable presence reassured them that he would always be there. These strong family connections gave the Turwilliger boys structure, comfort, and a sense of stability. But ultimately, they would be the ones forced to witness something unimaginable. They were the only survivors of the night's events and the only ones able to tell the story. Domenico Giganti was very real, a father who reappeared after years of absence. Constance hadn't grown up with him. He hadn't supported her, helped raise her, or played any meaningful role in her childhood. It wasn't until she reached her teenage years that he resurfaced, claiming he wanted to fix the past and finally act like a true father. His calls, messages, and attempts to assist with her schooling came across as friendly gestures meant to reconnect. But his sudden presence disrupted a life that already had structure, boundaries, and a fragile sense of stability. Constance approached the situation cautiously. She understood the emotional weight that family ties can carry, but she also recognized the danger of letting someone back in when they'd never truly earned trust in the first place. She established firm boundaries for how he could interact with Kiera. All communication had to go through her first. There would be no surprise calls, no unexpected visits, and no attempts to force a connection. These limits weren't meant to shut him out entirely. They were meant to protect a child who didn't know this man as her father. Constance set the rules and made sure everyone respected them. For Kiera, his sudden appearance was unsettling. She came from a family built on trust, consistency, and familiar faces she relied on every day. This new person claiming to be her father had no history with her. No shared memories, no foundation, nothing to build on. Kiera wasn't impolite, but she kept her distance. Kiera responded by quickly limiting visits and choosing to communicate with him only through her mother. It wasn't an act of defiance. She was protecting her own mental space and well-being. Warning signs appeared fast. Domenico began calling more than necessary and asking inappropriate questions about her activities, who she was with, and when she'd be home. He became fixated on the details of her schedule and increasingly possessive of her time. The family had hoped for a gradual, healthy reconnection, but that wasn't what happened. Domenico escalated, sending numerous late-night messages and expecting immediate replies, growing angry when she didn't respond. Eventually, he demanded that their conversations be moved off public platforms so her mother could no longer monitor them. Kier quickly realized that his demands were becoming more forceful the more she tried to set boundaries. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a calculated attempt to gain control. The situation escalated when Domenico crossed a firm, unacceptable line. He asked Kier to send him photos of herself in a swimsuit, leaving no room for ambiguity. Kier immediately told her mother. Constance Turwilliger acted swiftly, confronting Domenico directly and establishing strict, non-negotiable rules. All contact had to be public and transparent. Nothing could be private or suggestive. And there would be no conversations without her present, no exceptions. Domenico's reaction made it clear that he didn't view boundaries as something to respect, but as obstacles to circumvent. He resisted the rules, insisting he had a right to be close to Chiara and tried to bypass boundaries by contacting her directly. His texts grew accusatory, claiming that Constance was turning Chiara against him and damaging their relationship, but he failed to grasp a simple truth. Trust isn't declared. It's earned through consistent, reliable actions. By this point, Chiara Turwilliger had reached a decisive moment. She became more determined to keep her distance, avoid any meetings without her mother, and resist any attempts to manipulate or control her. She reported every inappropriate message and incident to her family, seeking their support to stay protected from him. Police already had a record of Domenico Giganti before the 2005 incident. That year, he was arrested for domestic violence, his first major encounter with the law. Victims reported physical harm, and investigators confirmed injuries consistent with their claims. Instead of serving prison time, he was placed in a pre-trial diversion program, which meant that if he completed it successfully, he would avoid criminal charges. The case was closed once the program ended, marking the first time a serious threat to others had been downplayed. By 2008, his behavior had escalated. He became involved in an animal abuse case that resulted in the deaths of 2 dogs. The county sheriff at the time described it as one of the worst cases he had ever encountered. The investigation revealed deeply troubling details, and it seemed likely he would face prison time. Yet, once again, the consequences were minimal. He was sentenced to 2 years of house arrest and probation, while Clear warning signs of escalating. Violence were overlooked, Domenico. Giganti interpreted this leniency as proof that the charges against him carried little real consequence. Rather than prompting change, it sent the message that aggressive and violent behavior could be tolerated if the proper legal procedures were followed. In 2012, a new and alarming episode unfolded. This time, it involved road rage. Witnesses reported that Domenico Giganti was driving his truck recklessly, deliberately creating hazards for cars and motorcycles. The situation culminated in two motorcycles colliding. When he was followed to a friend's house, he pulled out a knife and continued issuing threats. Although he faced charges for assault with a dangerous weapon and reckless endangerment, some of these charges were later dropped. His dangerous driving and brandishing of a weapon could have had severe consequences. Yet, he avoided jail once more. Instead, he was placed under house arrest and monitored for another 2 years. The underlying problem, his pattern of violent and aggressive behavior, remained unrest. There was no long-term intervention to address the root causes of his increasingly dangerous behavior. The system relied mainly on check-ins, mandatory classes, and high supervision. During this time, Domenico shifted from being controlling in private to openly intimidating in public. Every lenient outcome reinforced his belief that the system would continue offering him second chances. He didn't need to face consequences if he said the right things. By the early 2020s, his history revealed a troubling pattern. A tendency toward violence, disregard for the law, and readiness to use threats or weapons to get his way. Yet, instead of imposing stricter boundaries, the system continued to offer temporary measures, sidestepping the deeper, more difficult issues. This is how a dangerous pattern builds, a collection of warning signs that never trigger real consequences. On February 27, Turwilliger missed school due to tonsillitis and had a scheduled doctor's appointment. Domenico seized the opportunity to escalate his contact, asking intrusive questions far beyond what was reasonable. He demanded specifics about her visit, when it was, who would be with her, and even what the doctor would say, claiming he was concerned and needed exact details. In doing so, he broke the agreement that all information about Kier's health would go through her mother. The next day, around 3:00 p.m. on February 28, Domenico called again. Kier, occupied at the doctor's office, responded briefly, saying she would get back to him later. After that, Kier received a hurtful and disrespectful message. From then on, she only allowed communication that was absolutely necessary and supervised by Constance Turwilliger. This was the final confirmation. The man who claimed he wanted to be part of her life was now being cruel and manipulative. The family's restrictions weren't about limiting contact. They were about protecting boundaries and keeping Chiara safe. Domenico believed that being in control was his right and viewed any challenge to that control as a personal attack. Over time, it became clear that This was no longer just a case of a fractured family. It had escalated into a real and dangerous threat. Ironically, the very measures the family took to keep Kier safe only seemed to fuel Domenico's desire to assert power and control. Thomas Giganti and Bruce McInnes had lived together for nearly 18 years. Bruce knew Giganti's routines, his stress patterns, and how he usually reacted. That familiarity made it obvious when Giganti's behavior shifted. In late February 2023, he was pacing, mumbling to himself, and obsessively checking his phone. Every thought seemed dominated by one name, Chiara Turwilliger. On February 28, Domenico sent an angry message attempting to reach Kier again. But he failed. Bruce overheard him read the message aloud, and then heard him say a series of cruel things about her family. Suddenly, the rage gave way to a chilling calm. The next words from Domenico were neither loud nor furious. They were cold and composed. And just like that, I guess I need to go kill them all. Bruce froze. This wasn't a heated outburst or a careless threat. It sounded deliberate, something he had already decided in his mind. Not long after, Domenico began repeating the same unsettling lines. No one listens to me. They turned her against me. Something has to be done. He stopped referring to people by their names and instead grouped them together, which made Bruce wonder if Domenico's anger had expanded far beyond Chiara. Between these disturbing comments, Domenico paced and reread old messages again and again. He wasn't trying to calm himself. He was spiraling deeper. So why didn't Bruce call the police? Later, he admitted he had grown accustomed to hearing things like this from him. He had heard Giganti make intense angry statements before, and none of them had ever amounted to anything. To Bruce, it felt like the same old noise, bluster that would eventually fade. Then came the uncertainty. What exactly could he report? Who would he even call? And if he did, would it make things even worse? At home, faced with those questions, Bruce decided to wait it out. Giganti kept repeating the same lines throughout the night. Bruce tried redirecting him, urging him to focus on something else to cool down. But Domenico wouldn't hear it. She's not answering. They're in the way. This has to end. He didn't look for comfort. Didn't ask for guidance. He wasn't trying to be talked down. His mind was already made up. Only afterward did Bruce piece the meaning together. The clipped words, the fixation, the eerie moments of stillness. Everything had been slowly escalating towards something far more dangerous than heated language. Bruce McInnes never documented the threats or shared them with anyone, which is crucial to keep in mind. His only response was to try to ease the tension by talking to her. Later, he admitted, I didn't think it would go beyond talking, but it did. And in that tense moment came the hard truth. By late February, a man with a known violent past was openly sharing his intentions with another adult. Yet no one contacted authorities until the Night it was already too late. What once sounded like empty threats began shifting into something far more alarming. By February 2023, Domenico Giganti's tone had lost any trace of courtesy. The effort to appear cooperative had morphed into something darker. A growing, unmistakable intent to intimidate. He no longer asked for conversations with Kira's mother, no longer tried to set boundaries. His focus narrowed entirely on removing what he believed stood in his way. It became clear that Domenico was making plans. He began asking detailed questions about Chiara's daily routine, where she would be, who would be with her, and what time she'd return home. This wasn't casual conversation. It was information gathering with a purpose. Constance Turwilliger maintained strict control. All communication had to go through her, ensuring it could be monitored and tracked. She was the main source of his frustration. Domenico accused her of manipulating their daughter for her own benefit, and his anger toward the entire family escalated rapidly. By the evening of February 28, everything was in place for what would soon become a nightmare. He excluded anyone else from his plans, chose the time when the house would be most vulnerable, and at least in his own mind, prepared to act alone. There were no warnings and no witnesses. Only intent. At about 1:30 a.m. on March 1, 2023, while the Turwilliger family slept, shouting erupted, followed by a rapid burst of gunfire. 9 shots in total. In the brief pauses between them, terrified voices could be heard, and then everything fell eerily silent. The 2 boys jolted awake to the chaos. When they stepped out of their room, this was the scene that met them. The older brother grabbed his phone, started a video call, and reached out to family friend Michael Bisson, someone he trusted completely. He expected to see Kier's face on the screen. But instead, it showed 2 terrified boys trying to describe something far beyond their understanding. Michael Bisson reacted immediately, still on the call as he responded. He kept his voice low as he instructed the boys to stay in their room and not move until he arrived. While driving, he verified their address and continued calling to make sure they were still safe. In fact, during parts of the drive, the call stayed connected until he reached the house. When Bisson stepped inside, a horrifying sight appeared almost immediately near the front entrance. Constance Turwilliger and Michael Watson were motionless. Without hesitation, he rushed upstairs to the children. He found them unharmed, lifted them up gently, and carried them downstairs, shielding them from seeing anything else. Once they were in his car, he locked the doors from the inside, ensured they were secure, and then contacted emergency services. Michael Bisson told the emergency dispatcher that he had received a video call from a child, and upon arriving at the Turwilliger home, found several unresponsive adults. He emphasized that the 2 boys were safe in his car and that immediate help was needed. He didn't attempt to assess the condition of the victims inside. He avoided going back into the house, aware that every Moment was critical. Just after 2 a.m., the first police units arrived, securing the street and establishing a safe perimeter. Headlights pierced the darkness as first responders took control. Police, paramedics, and a forensic team all working together. On the quiet street, the only sound came from the flashing emergency lights. Neighbors stayed inside, not venturing out until the sirens had faded. The boys were kept warm in a patrol car, receiving immediate attention from a medic and a specialist trained to work with child witnesses. Their quick call had played a crucial role, preventing the situation from becoming even worse. Police began examining the house, noting a broken lock and a split door frame. Clear evidence of forced entry. 9. Spent shell casings were found on the ground floor, carefully documented and mapped to trace the paths of the bullets. There were no signs of a robbery. No prolonged struggle had taken place and valuables had been left untouched. This attack targeted the residents of the home. Medical personnel confirmed that the victims had died at the scene. Police discovered that Constance Turwilliger and Michael Watson had been shot in the head near the front entrance, while Glenda Turwilliger had been shot in the face and found upstairs in bed. Keir was discovered unharmed, and her location was carefully documented to preserve the integrity of the evidence. Investigators divided the house into zones, meticulously recording every movement to maintain the chain of custody. Police canvassed the neighborhood, collecting footage from street and home security cameras. Several neighbors pointed out surveillance systems, and one camera captured a pickup truck entering the Turwilliger driveway at 1:19 a.m. The truck turned off its headlights just before stopping. Over the next 71 seconds, the sounds of the door being forced open, and 9 gunshots were recorded. Afterward, the truck drove away. Shortly after, a nearby street camera captured what appeared to be the same silver pickup heading toward Domenico Giganti's residence. Forensic investigators analyzed the video timeline and cross-referenced it with evidence from the scene. The audio matched the number of spent shell casings and bloody shoe prints traced a direct rapid path from the front door up the stairs. All footage was carefully reviewed with timestamps aligned to dispatcher logs to correct for any discrepancies caused by different time zones or devices. Clocks, phones, and other electronics, including Keir Turwilliger's, were collected from the scene for further examination. Call logs and messages were copied to a secure location, accessible only to authorized personnel and officially documented. These digital records were crucial for reconstructing the timeline, showing the buildup of tension, the last communications, and the abrupt silence that followed. By midday, investigators had gathered substantial evidence. Clear signs of forced entry, targeted violence against specific family members, and no indication of theft. Synchronized video of a silver pickup truck combined with a digital trail of threats and harassment pointed strongly to Domenico Giganti. He had motive, knowledge of the family schedules, and a history of escalating Conflict with them. On the morning of March 1st, investigators approached Giganti using a knock-and-talk method, which allows police to speak with someone without a warrant. A silver pickup truck resembling the one captured on surveillance outside the Turwilliger home was parked nearby. When Domenico and Bruce McInnes stepped outside, police informed him that Chiara Turwilliger had died. He laughed and said, "That's got to be a joke." He didn't ask what had happened or inquire about his daughter. When he asked for a cigarette, he explained he needed to calm down because of the dogs showing no visible distress. Detectives asked him to come to the station for questioning, and he agreed immediately. Yet, he appeared unconcerned about the situation. On the way, he didn't ask about Chiara or the rest of the family, instead engaging in casual small talk. Officers observed that none of his questions or comments reflected awareness or concern about the fact that his daughter had been killed. Before leaving, Bruce McInnes directly asked Domenico if he had anything to do with the events. Without a trace of remorse, Domenico replied, "Yeah, I shot her 3 times. Now it's just us. Stick together. We'll get through it." There was no explanation, no sorrow, only a cold, almost detached attempt to make McInnes understand his own feelings. During the initial station interview, Domenico behaved as if he had no emotions. He didn't request anyone contact him on his behalf and showed no interest in the investigation. When asked direct questions, he gave evasive answers and veered into unrelated topics. The formal report noted that his reactions were completely unlike what would be expected from a parent who had just lost a child. Afterward, Domenico Giganti attempted to shift the blame. While in jail, he requested a supervised meeting with Bruce McInnes and suggested that Bruce take responsibility for the crime so they could remain friends. He framed it as a reasonable course of action if Bruce would just believe him. Bruce refused and later reported the conversation to police, quoting Domenico's exact words. A few days later, Domenico repeated the same suggestion during a recorded phone call from his cell, telling Bruce he should confess in his place and even hinting that Bruce could plead insanity. All of these recorded calls collected according to standard procedure were added to the case, further demonstrating that Domenico was still lying to witnesses and attempting to manipulate the narrative. The first question at Domenico Giganti's hearing centered on his mental competence. His defense argued that he should not face charges because he suffered from a mental illness and wasn't fully aware of the consequences of his actions. They requested additional psychiatric evaluations and highlighted his history of violent outbursts. The defense's primary objective was to have Giganti declared not guilty by reason of insanity. In effect, this would eliminate the charge of premeditated murder. However, prosecutors immediately countered, framing the case as a deliberate, calculated act rather than the result of a momentary lapse or mental breakdown. Giganti remained silent throughout the trial. He didn't speak, avoided eye contact with the Jury, and gave no reaction at all. When the victims' names were read aloud, jurors interpreted his behavior as showing complete lack of remorse. The prosecutor's closing argument proved decisive, tracing the steps from initial threats to the execution of the plan. The timeline was presented in meticulous detail, with the prosecution emphasizing that all evidence pointed to one conclusion. This was not a spontaneous act, but a carefully orchestrated plan. From the beginning, the court acknowledged that Gigante exhibited signs of a personality disorder, but ruled that it did not impair his understanding of his actions or their impact on others. After only a few hours of deliberation, the jurors returned a verdict of guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced Domenico Gigante to 4 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole, ensuring he would never be free again. As the sentence was read, Gigante displayed no emotion. He remained silent, avoided looking around the courtroom, and showed no visible reaction. For the family members listening to the judge's final words, it served as a solemn confirmation that justice had been served. While the sentence brought closure to the case, it could not restore the lives that had been lost. The government formally convicted Domenico Gigante of planning and executing a mass murder, removing any possibility of his release. The 2 young boys were placed with an extended family for care, child protection. Professionals assisted state agencies in determining custody, and the boys were relocated to a secure undisclosed location to shield them from further trauma and public exposure, ensuring their safety, establishing a stable daily routine, providing medical care, and continuing their education became the immediate priorities. Glenda, Constance, Kiera Turwilliger, and Michael Watson will always be remembered through their story. It is now up to the adults to drive change and take action, to build systems that recognize warning signs and ensure that the right words spoken at the right time are finally heard. If you found this case fascinating, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. We post crime case